Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. On this episode we will be transforming this 1970s dining room table. It's actually a family heirloom and has been in my family for over 40 years. So thanks for tuning in and watching this transformation. The first step you want to do is get yourself a really good degreaser and scratch pad. Here I'm using a Zep product that you can purchase at any local hardware store. What you really want to do is saturate all of the surface area and give it a really good cleaning. This piece in particular has had many years of wax buildup from cleaning products, so what I'm looking to do is to get it cleaned up as much as possible to get that sheen off, to get it ready for the next step. After I've applied the degreaser and the scratch pad to the entire surface, I then go in with a wet washcloth and sort of just take off the residue. You can see here how a lot of that shine is gone now and it's sort of a more dull look to the table, and that's exactly what you want. That's exactly the purpose of the degreaser, is to get all of that shine off. Now the fun part, the detailed legs. So it's not as easy as the tabletop, of course, but it's exactly the same steps. You apply the degreaser, scratch pad, followed up by the washcloth. Now's a good time to inspect your piece. Here I'm looking for dings and scratches in all the areas that I'm going to have to apply a repair to. As you can see here, there's a pretty big ding. I separated the leaflet and I'm taking a look at the type of wood that I'm working with. Originally I had thought that this might have been solid wood, but on a second glance you can tell here that it's particle wood with a veneer on top, which is very common for 1970s furniture. Another way of indicating whether or not it is a veneer is just taking a look at the patterns. Wood doesn't naturally grow this way, so it's a pretty good indicator that it is not real wood. For this project, I'm using a Milwaukee Orbital Sander. Pretty easy, hook and loop sandpaper, and to start off with, I'm doing 150 grit. As I had mentioned before, this dining room table has been in my family since I was a little girl, so I am very nervous about this coming out good, because at this point, now that I am sanding it, there is no turning back, so fingers crossed. What I'm pointing out here is the area that was bubbled up. Now that I've sanded it, it's really revealed the damage, and these are the areas that I'm going to have to patch. Here's a better look at some of the damage after the first sanding. The lifted part on the edges. And then you have, again, just showing a little bit of the transition between the table and the leaflet. And just to give you a better look of the composite and the veneer. This area was probably the worst area of the table. We had seen that ding originally in the first segment of the video. Lots of scratches from years of use, bubbling up, and you can see here a lot of the scratches again and bubbling up from sanding. The next step here is to take a wet washcloth and wipe down all of the surface area. If you didn't have any damage, which is unlikely for a piece this old, I would recommend just going right ahead and to the next step in sanding. But because I have damage, I have to prep the area for repair. Here's a closer look at the table after sanding it. You can see here that it has lost its shine, which is exactly what you want to get it ready for the next step. I did want to point out that in this project I'm painting the table black, so I don't have to really sand it, just a light scuff. But if you did want to stain the table, you can with veneer. You just have to be careful of this very thin layer that's on top. So you have to sand very lightly and very carefully if you're going to stain it. Now it's time for the repairs. What I like to use is dry decks and a small spatula. Again, you can just pick this up at any local hardware store, and you want to just fill in all of the open bare surfaces. Some areas will require 2 coats, some just a skim coat. Here is the tabletop surface and all of the areas that I had to add some dry decks to it. I actually had more damage than I thought. This here is damage to one of the clawfoot legs caused by one of our furry friends when I was a kid. And so that also has to be repaired with the dry deck. So same process, just apply some dry decks. This will probably take 3 coats because the damage is so deep. Apparently I was quite the graffiti artist and wrote under the dining room table when I used to play under it. Now that all the repairs have been done, I can go ahead and sand. This is my third and final sanding before applying the primer paint to the table. For this project I used the Zinsser bin primer. I had never used it before, but it got great reviews. But I did take it a step further and actually tinted this primer because I'm painting my table black. So I wanted to ensure that I was going to get full coverage by tinting it. I don't know if it's really necessary, but I did it anyway. One thing I did notice about this primer is that it actually has a very strong smell, and it actually smells like moonshine, at least to me anyway. So just make sure that you're in a well-ventilated area when you're painting. I eventually had to open windows because it was just so strong, and it sort of lingered in the house for a couple of days. Okay, the first coat of primer is all set. Overall, this project hasn't seemed too bad so far. I haven't really ran into any snags. I'm now going to let this primer sit overnight. The recommended is overnight. Now that I've let the table cure overnight, I'm now going to go in with a block sander and sand over all of the surface area, getting it ready for the second coat of primer. As I'm applying the second coat of primer, I'm noticing that there is some tint marks that are appearing as I'm rolling, and I think that's because I didn't shake the can good enough to get it ready for the second apply. And here's what the table looks like after the second coat of primer. For the paint color, I had selected Benjamin Moore Advanced Base 4 in Satin. I had done a lot of research on what paint to use because I didn't want to do a gloss finish. I wanted something a little bit more matted down, but not like chalk paint. So I did look into chalk paint. I looked into other brands as well, and I am so glad that I went with this particular paint. It's probably the best paint I have ever used. When you see me applying it here, you can just see it emulsify into itself. It doesn't have any streaks, and it leaves such a professional factory grade finish when you're done. After the first coat of paint, you can already tell that it's just going to be an amazing finish. One thing that was pointed out to me was the area between the leaflet and the actual table. Originally I wasn't going to paint it, but it is clearly white. So I am going to go back in and just paint those seams so that you don't notice them as much once the table is put together. One drawback to the Benjamin Moore Advanced Paint is its cure time. I believe it tells you to wait 48 hours. I actually waited 72 hours before applying the second coat. After the first coat has cured, what you want to do is go in with a very fine sandpaper and just sort of scuff it just enough so that the second coat has something to adhere to. You want to go ahead and wipe down all of the surface area with a lint-free cloth to get it prepped for its final coat of paint. I should have mentioned in the very first coat of paint that you do want to start off by painting all of the detailed area first. So I recommend starting with the legs and working your way up. You can see here that I am painting the sides of the table first, and the reason for this is because I am using a brush, some of those brush strokes you notice on the tabletop, and when you roll it, it doesn't quite get rid of the brush strokes. So you want to go ahead and do all of your paintbrush areas first, and then the roller like I'm doing here at the very end. Because this is the second and final coat of paint I'm applying to the table, I am going to let it cure for a full 7 days before I go ahead and put anything on the table or use it. This is to ensure that it's as close to factory finish as possible. I have been wanting to do this project for years but was too scared to get it started. I am so glad I finally did it and it came out as good as it did. I mean, it is truly a transformation, and one that just means so much for my family. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining me on this transformation.